So a couple of weeks ago, you may remember that I shared and even talked about on this channel the petition that had been put forward to the government to launch a independent Brexit inquiry to have a look at the impacts that Brexit has had on the UK in pretty much every sector that Brexit has had an impact in. And the petition has done incredibly well. It got over 10,000 signatures, so that means that the government has had to sort of respond, and we'll be going over that response in a bit. Needless to say, the response from the government was, "Don't worry, everything is working as intended. We promise, guys." It wasn't, shall we say, um, maybe an honest and truthful response because, like I say, according to them, everything is working well. Nothing is going wrong at this moment in time when it comes to Brexit. Everything is, quote, working as intended. Yet you've got things like the EU Revocation Reform Bill, which, if it goes through, is going to make it even harder for businesses to do, business with the EU when they're already suffering so much. You're just going to put even more barriers in their way to do business. That isn't going to help the economy. But then again, everything's running as intended, according to the government, when it comes to this. But like I say, that petition is still up. You can still sign it. And like I say, if it gets to over 100,000 signatures, which it is on, by the looks of it, it is on its way to potentially achieving, we could have a potential debate in Parliament about this. So that would be quite fun, I think, to see if it gets to 10,000. Of course, you can only sign it if you're a British citizen, but if you do know someone who is from the UK and they haven't signed it, please do spread the word about it. But let's go jumping into the response from the government and someone who decided to fact check, shall we say, the government's response to this particular petition calling for an inquiry into Brexit. So before we do that, though, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can well buy me coffee. There is also the YouTube thank you button. There is also the Pony Club you can join as well. And all that helps support the channel. And like I say, if you also want to help support the channel, just hit the like and share button. It helps out as well. So, on with today's story, again coming from the Yorkshire Bylines, the title of Fact Checking the Government's Response to the Brexit Inquiry Petition. On the 18th of November, a petition was launched, calling for an inquiry into the impact of Brexit. The text of the petition read, "The benefits that were promised if the UK exited the European Union have not been delivered. So we call upon the government to hold a public inquiry to assess the impact of Brexit has had on its country and citizens." And of course, at the 10,000 signature threshold, the government responded. But the observers have been quick to highlight some fundamental errors in the response. At the time of writing, the petition has had over 80,000 signatures, and if and when it reaches the 100,000 threshold, the government will debate this in Parliament. So before that happens, it would be useful to have a look at the claims made by the government response because they are not as accurate as one might hope. Of course, you've got to remember it's the Tory party. Of course, they want to say, our precious Brexit is operating, fully and well. But you've got to remember at this moment in time, there are a lot of people in the Tory party that are married to the very idea that Brexit is part of this grand central plan. The movement Liz Truss was part on and her crazy free market fundamentalist ideas. We went over, the 1812 website a couple of days ago that basically said, yeah, look, Brexit's a massive opportunity to just, get rid of the NHS. So, yeah. Yeah, there are people that want some crazy ideas with Brexit, but shall we say them out loud? But anyway, back to it. So, the government response starts by saying, it does not believe that the UK's departure from the EU to be an appropriate subject for a public inquiry. 3 paragraphs are dedicated to explaining that the parliamentary reporting structures and sources of information are already for that in place. If the government's view makes, again, further scrutiny unnecessary. The point, however, is that the public inquiry would have a much higher public profile. To an extent, the government can even control the scrutiny process in Parliament, but a public inquiry would have sent of government interference. Then the government then goes on to try and reiterate that the decision to leave the EU was the result of a, quote, democratic choice by the British people. As has already pointed out on many occasions, while the referendum was democratic, in that when we offered a vote on whether to leave the EU, this result was advisory only, and Parliament was under no obligation to heed that advice. Further, the question put to the people was simply an in or out choice, with no information about how this might happen, and whether the UK should remain part of the single market and customs union, and what impact this would have on our economy and political situation in Northern Ireland, for example. In fact, a High Court judge has since ruled that the referendum result had, if the referendum result had been binding, thus mandating the government take us out of the EU, then the courts would have had to set that decision aside due to the number of flaws in the process. So while this certainly wasn't a, quote, choice for the British people, it was a very ill-informed one and far from democratic. The response goes on to say that the UK EU institutions are functioning as intended, and the, quote, functioning part does claim is a big misrepresentation of that malfunction that we've had at least in the last 2 years. Dozens of examples present themselves as to try and sort of as proof of this lie. An outstanding case in point is the new need for the new UK ports to establish customs posts and facilities for carrying out checks for imposed on livestock and animal products. The full sanitary and phytosanitary import controls back in March of 2021 that The Guardian reported on that the construction required facilities was way behind schedule. Indeed, pressure is building on ministers to push back their deadlines to set out measures for scaling back controls, ran the article. 6 months later, the Daily Mail reported that ministers today were even announcing further delays on the introduction of the customs checks, and that new checking goods coming from the EU into the UK had been due for October of 2020. And that these will now be phased in across 2022 as ministers try to avoid further disruptions. By April of 2022, the Brexit commentator, Chris Gray, was noting that the government was, quote, considering further delaying or even abandoning the planned introduction of the full sanitary and phytosanitary import controls for goods from the EU. If it was abandoning these checks, the government has a potential for exposing UK customers to dodgy food imports from the continent. This is hardly taking back control and is certainly not evidence of the UK EU institutions functioning as intended. But of course, it didn't stop there. They decided to blame the global economy, which, again, kind of funny when you look at sort of the data that we've talked about before in the past. The government then asserts that, quote, the global economy faces significant headwinds. And since 2020, businesses have had to come to the COVID pandemic, the global supply chain disruptions, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is indeed challenging to disentangle definitively the impact of these global factors from the long-term effects of the UK's withdrawal from the EU. Whilst it may be challenging to crunch the numbers and separate out the particular impact Brexit has had on the UK economy, economists are more than up to the challenge. In fact, many have already taken the time to research and have even presented their findings in quantifying the Brexit effect. In its November of 2022 Economic and Fiscal Outlook, the Office for Budget Responsibility crunched the numbers and calculated that Brexit had had a significant impact on UK trade. The OBR is funded by the Treasury to give economic forecasts based on independent analysis of public finances. It estimates that Brexit will result in the UK's trading intensity being 15% lower in the long run than if we had remained in the EU. The government, therefore, cannot hide behind the, quote, global factors argument and challenging economics when it comes to its reluctance for a public to try and quantify the impact of Brexit has had on our economy. And then, of course, the idea that Brexit is also broadly functioning as intended. It's broadly functioning as intended. The suggestion that the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement are, quote, broadly function as intended is perhaps the most barefaced of lies embedded within the government response. The Northern Ireland Protocol offers the clearest evidence of this, having created a border in the Irish Sea, effectively separating part of the United Kingdom from another. A succession of government ministers have tried to deny and even undermine or even overwrite this detail since its inception. The constant wrangling of bad faith has soured the EU and UK relations, and one consequence of which is that Brussels is holding back from even confirming that the UK can even remain part of the Horizon Europe scientific research programme. And perhaps the government was trying to rely on the word broadly for being taken in the narrowest possible sense. The government then states that the trade and cooperation agreement is, quote, the world's largest zero tariffs and zero quotas deal, and the first time the EU has ever agreed such access to a free trade agreement. However, as EU members, we already had zero tariff and zero quota agreements with the new arrangement that isn't in fact improved. It is with all the barriers are now erected to trade and the movement of goods, people, capital, and services, the deal we now have is significantly worse than before. In the next part of the response, the government claims to be, quote, opening new opportunities for the UK businesses across the globe, having secured free trade agreements with 71 non-EU countries. But the analysis shows that the great majority of these 71 secured agreements are a simple rollover copy of the deal that we already had with these countries as a member of the EU. So far, these new opportunities are very tenuous. One new deal, though, is the one we struck with Australia, with economists have calculated that the trade will eventually add 0.08% to UK GDP. And the deal has, according to the BBC News, quote, been salvaged by former Trade Minister George Eustice. Eustice, who also helped secure the agreement, told the Common Debate that it was, quote, not actually a very good deal for the EU. And UK farmers have been up in arms about the deal, which is harmful to their interests, with a lack of safeguards on food standards, animal welfare, and the lack of reciprocal benefits. Never mind the carbon footprint of flying all the beef and lamb from halfway around the world. And finally, the government highlights the recent increase in foreign direct investment, which is, quote, a key driver in productivity and innovation. However, it cherry picks the particular statistics it chooses to quote, saying that inward FDI stock has increased from 2.2 trillion to 2.6 trillion in 2021. By using the, quote, stock figure, the value of foreign-owned assets held in the UK, rather than the increase in investment known as flows, it has misrepresented the true picture. The most recent data in the House of Commons library relates back to 2019, show this. In 2019, the value of foreign direct investment in the UK, i.e. inward flows into the UK, were worth £35.6 billion, down from £65.9 billion in 2018. So since the implementation back in 1992, the UK membership of the EU single market has been a cornerstone of FDI into the UK. Firms such as Honda would invest here and have tariff-free entry into the UK and also enjoy huge economies of scale. By that inward flow of investment has now been dramatically reduced. Economists for the University College London and LES have initially predicted that leaving the single market would cut flow and FDI by a quarter in October of 2022, and they revised their estimate upwards of 37% of reduction, warning that with Brexit, we estimate a significant and substantial decrease in FDI. And so it came to pass that Brexit has made the UK economy far less attractive and one in which to invest. And of course, we've talked about this for years. We've just talked about the fact of Japan. The fact that with the Japan trade deal, one which they were celebrating all that too long ago, oh my God, this Japan deal we've got is amazing. Isn't it amazing, guys? Well, Japan has been trading less with the UK, but more with the EU. Because when we were in the EU, the Conservatives and the business, the entire selling model of the UK to Japan was, we are the gateway to Europe. Not so anymore. We're not in, the EU and the single market and customs union. So that, as we've said before, and we discussed that, last week, is having a big knock-on effect of our economy. Massive. And this is just going to keep on rolling on. And yet you've got Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, when they were sort of, putting forward their budget, as a lot of, experts and budget economists were having a look at it going, yeah, essentially they're just crossing their fingers and hoping that the economy grows and that inflation goes down. There is no very clear plan about how to achieve this growth that they constantly talk about. So, the current school curriculum stresses the importance of the fundamental British values for our school children and college students: democracy, rule of law, respect and tolerance, and individual liberty. When a government and an official document produces a statement that is so tenuous and even deliberately misleading as this, one even begins to wonder whether the government has increasing any respect for British values. So, yeah, this continues massively to be a huge step in the wrong direction. If this does reach, of course, the 100,000, like I say, it's at 80,000 at the moment. It is very likely it could reach that number, and we could see a debate in Parliament about this, which would be certainly very interesting to see that when that happens. So, yeah, we'll keep you posted on that if that does certainly happen. But like I say, if you haven't signed that petition yet, go sign it. You can find it sort of very easily if you sort of type in public Brexit inquiry. You should be able to find it very, very easily. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. Like I say, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can well buy me coffee. And of course, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you link, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. And as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.